Hello. I've been talking for a minute. I didn't know I was still muted. How is everybody? Welcome. We're going to talk about train theory today. It looks like we are on and working. Going to let people come in here. Looks like there's some people on already, and I'm using something called Restream, which is a more exciting app. It allows me to screen share. Watch this. Woohoo! So I don't actually have any slides today except this beautiful picture, but in the future, this is a little bit of a test run to see, like, in the future, will this work? So thank you for everyone who joined us a couple weeks ago when we had to reschedule. My puppy's doing great, in case you were there. It was just too emotional. I was too excited. Still not hearing me. Uh-oh. Thank you for telling me that you are still not hearing me. Let me check. Okay, now can you hear me? Give me a thumbs up or something if that worked. It seemed like it was. Yay, okay, perfect. Okay, it said it was selected for default, but then it didn't do it. And you can see me, right? I'm assuming, yes, I can see myself. I have my phone volume turned down, so. Okay, there's a bit of a delay, it looks like, not only with me talking, but of your questions coming in. So we will just work on this, and this will be really great. Okay, there we go. Some more people are coming. I'm actually going to turn my phone off. Hopefully that works, so that I don't clog up my internet here. And we'll get talking. Okay, so sorry for everyone who's watching this on replay, because these first few minutes can be so weird, but, you know, skip to now, so you wouldn't know that if you were watching this on replay. I'm really excited about today. So a couple weeks ago, we tried to do this. I was too excited for my puppy to handle, basically, so he's totally fine. He's with my mom right now so that he doesn't happen again. And I actually am glad. There's always good, right, to timing. God works the best timing. So just good to, like, have thought through some things, to understand some things, and to really focus on, make sure that I get my clear focus, which is I'm presenting a theory to you all as scientists, because we can do science. That is a definition of science. Science is reproducible, demonstratable, observable things. We have been taught for a long, I'm already ranting, here we go. We have been taught for a long time that science is something that should only be reserved for the experts who are telling you what you should know, and no one else should be listened to, including yourself in your own eyes, because that's not scientific. They have completely adulterated the definition of science. Science is actually and completely a demonstratable, observable, reproducible science, which means now we can't have all the equipment, right? So some things that we do, it is a little tricky because we don't have an electron microscope. But the principles of a science, you should be able to do a science experiment design that will work to prove at least some part of your point. You may not be able to prove the very, like, specific thing of what does this bacteria look like without a microscope, for example, but you should be able to detect spread by doing a culture, which you can make with a homemade petri dish and culturing something and then culturing it again and see if the disease spreads, right? Or if it grows, or what conditions it would grow under, or if sunlight kills it, or all of that. If you do a petri dish with a bacteria and you put it in the same thing, but one is in the sun and one is in the house or whatever, but it's sealed and closed and, you know, all things are the same, and the one in the sun dies and the one in the house doesn't, that would be highly, you could build a hypothesis on that, right? Hypothesis is an educated guess at which you are testing then with experiments to see what the theory is. So a hypothesis is going to be from that sunlight inhibits the growth of bacteria in petri dishes. Okay, so we can do lots of things with our own observable science. So I would love to get you guys thinking about observable science. Some of the stuff we're talking about, we can't observe. Or you may not have, it may not take very fancy equipment, but you don't have a microscope, even just a basic one. So that is weird. This video double reflects, so we're not actually backwards. But I'm used to seeing myself backwards, so it's weird. No, I am backwards. Anyway, okay, sorry, not distracted, but that's why I'm distracted. Okay, so here are the things we're going to talk about today. And hopefully this is coming through and hearing and great. Number one. Sorry, I just got very afraid that the live will not be recorded. Nope, that's not possible. Okay, number one, current mainstream paradigm. I want to talk about what we know just as a review of germ theory, right? What do we operate on as our disease paradigm? So a lot of words that we hear a lot related to disease paradigm are things like we want to avoid an illness. We want to kill the virus. We want to fight against those bad guys, those bad bugs. And we want to, our immune system fights and kills things. We are avoiding things. We're cleansing. We are sterilizing, right? All of those things are words that we use in this paradigm. What is this paradigm? This paradigm is called germ theory. Germ theory was made popular by Louis Pasteur. We're going to talk about the history of it though. So Louis Pasteur, since he's the famous one, he kind of published the terrain theory I had a timeline of this stuff, guys, and I left it at home. (1878) or 1860, I'm not sure which of these dates, but 1860 to 1878 type time period. That is when Pasteur really did a lot of his work about germ theory. Okay, before Pasteur's germ theory, there was a man, his name was Geronimo Fracastoro. It's an Italian poet and physician. He, in 1546, published a work, De Contagibus et Contagiosum Morbis, El Aurium Contente. That's not how you say any of those words. He published this in 1546, so 300 almost years before Pasteur. Just keep that in mind. But he said the true nature of contagions is there are two diseases, and that is the mode of transmission, two categories. One is airborne and the other is waterborne. And when a particle in the air or in the water comes and contaminates you, then a disease happens. Okay? So more than 300 years before Pasteur discovered germ theory, says this book, Béchamp or Pasteur, that these organisms or something, some contagion in the water and contagion in the air cause disease. Okay. In 1683, so 200 years before, they started figuring out, 1590, 1683, they started getting a microscope, but it wasn't powerful enough. And then in 1683, they did create a microscope that could magnify 100 to 150 times. And he found all these things in water, saliva, dental tartar, etc. He named them animalcula. He described they seem to probably be Bacillus Buccalis maximus and something else I'm not going to say. Rods and cones, right, and spiral stuff. And then in 1762, a man named Plenciz, Plenciz, a Viennese physician, in 1762 published a germ theory of infectious disease, saying that these microorganisms were capable of reproduction outside the body. They might get put from one place to the other by the air, and that's basically germ theory, right? Pasteur claimed to have thought of this theory. He published it as his own, and he published it again in the year, gosh, I think 1860-ish. We'll get there. What's really fascinating, I have just recently read Florence Nightingale's book called Notes on Nursing. It's a beautiful book that every single person should read. It is not about being a nurse as we think of nurses today, but it is how to kindly and well take care of your sick people in your house. So highly recommend that book. She wrote, I think in that book, but definitely wrote, Notes on Nursing. In 1860, she published this book. She attacked the idea of that old guy, the germ theory from 1762. And she said of infection, and I'm quoting this, which is quoted in this book, in the other book, diseases are not individuals arranged in classes like cats and dogs, but conditions growing out of one another. Is it not living in a continual mistake to look upon diseases as we do as separate entities which must exist like cats and dogs, instead of looking upon them as conditions, like a dirty or clean condition, just as much under our control, or rather as the reactions of kindly nature against the conditions which we have placed ourselves? So her argument, and there's more, but her argument really is, what if diseases are not bugs, but what if they are a reaction of nature to balance out something we did? We didn't eat good food. We didn't take care of our sewage system. We didn't change the bedding. And so then there's a reaction to the thing that we did. Okay, if you've just joined us, a few more people have. Hello, welcome. I am presenting my discussion on the germ theory and just different ideas that I've had. So this is, I suppose it's a class, but it's much more of a discussion of, hey, here are things that I am noticing. Here are things that I am reading. These are things that I would love to discuss further. Are there holes in my theory? So what I'm doing right now is presenting a little bit of the history of germ theory, which has been our ruling medical model, right? We all know that. Next, we're going to talk about the natural paradigm that I feel like I have grown up in. And there's a couple of different ones, so we'll talk about that as well. And then I want to talk about my new ideas that come not fully from me. Like, I'm connecting them in different ways than I've heard fully, but I'm not the one who's put a ton of study and time. I'm just excited about the collaboration that's happened this year. Okay, so welcome. Okay, so basically the point of this book, and this book is I highly recommend it. Bechamp or Pasteur, A Lost Chapter in the History of Biology by Ethel de Hume. I really like this book. It's very fun. It kind of is investigative journalist story. Anyway, moving on. Okay, so germ theory happened that long ago. Some of the main keys of germ theory is there is a disease or microorganism that causes symptoms. If you avoid or kill that, then symptoms go away. So let's keep that in mind, okay? This postulation also incorporates the idea that healthy human beings or healthy animals or healthy plants are sterile. There is no bacteria or germs on them, right? It's only our own cells. And it's hard to even conceive of that anymore, right? Because we are so entrenched and knowing about the microbiome. We all know that we have bacteria. We all know that we have gut flora. You know, we all have heard about that. It's become so prevalent that it's very rare to find a person who has not heard of that in the whole world, or at least the Western world, right? And so we know that sterile people don't exist. In fact, people have done studies with sterile mice and rats and things like that. And if you make them sterile, they very soon die. So sterility does not work. It is not health. It is not the only thing. Okay, so we have this old paradigm. Number one, sterile equals health. There are germs that make disease. Avoid the germs or kill the germs and the disease goes away. That's germ theory, right? Okay, natural paradigm. So in the natural paradigm, when I first started learning things, I really started learning in the idea of a little calmer. It was within the paradigm of germ theory, but expanded, right? Okay, yes, you do get a bacterial infection, but it's because your immune system is weak. You're missing a nutrition. If you don't have enough cod liver oil, right, vitamins A and D, then you're vulnerable to an infection from something. So that's kind of the ideas that happen with germ theory. I'm sorry, with the natural paradigm, but still holding on to germ theory. And then very soon after, I started looking at GAPS. So I started my natural health journey with paleo, which is like dipping your toes in the water of the ocean, right? And then I started finding GAPS and Weston A. Price and the teachings of Dr. Royal Lee taught by a standard process, and finding out these deeper lakes that we're walking and moving into, okay? So when all of that is happening, sorry, gosh, let me get my brain back in. We switch topics and it's hard to jump to this one. Let's describe the natural paradigm within germ theory. That's all we need to do here, and then we're going to move on. I keep jumping ahead in my brain, and I need to not go that fast. So that's the natural paradigm. Germs exist, like there are bad guys, and we need to avoid them. But if you get sick, like it's kind of your fault. You didn't eat enough food. You didn't clean up your body with toxins very much, or you didn't strengthen your immune system enough, or you didn't get the right childhood illnesses when you were younger, and so your immune system's not practiced. But it still is based on this idea that there are bad germs that can make us sick, okay? So new paradigm of natural paradigm for most people is that germs still exist, but it's your responsibility, and you can do something about it. It's not negative, but you can do something about it, and you can make germs not have a problem in your body. Okay. Then I started listening to GAPS, and GAPS really goes about how it goes a lot on that line, but it also introduces this idea and digs more into good microbiome and healthy flora. But there's a concept that I heard, Dr. Natasha talked about it, sorry, the first time I listened to her. It's called polymorphism. And in her new book, the blue one, pleomorphism, not polymorphism, pleomorphism, Pleomorphism, pleomorphism. Pleomorphism is the amazing ability of microbes to change shape and form to the point of looking and behaving like something completely different. As mentioned above, bacteria have been found to exchange their genetics between one another, other microbes, and even our human cells. Depending on the environment, food supply, and the stages in their life cycle, microbes can become unrecognizable. In many cases, microbiology has been studying different forms of one creature, thinking they were entirely different microbes. A good example of this is L forms of bacteria, which are attracting a lot of interest, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, it doesn't have the thing, but basically they have observed under certain conditions that a cell, like a blood cell, actually becomes a staph cell under certain conditions. So this began the thought, but I didn't hear anything more about it. So 7 years ago, maybe, I heard about pleomorphism. I've heard about it here and there, but never studied it and never really had a huge focus on it. The other thing that I learned through the GAPS diet and helping people through that is Dieoff, illness, and detox are almost exactly the same symptoms. One of the things that I worked the hardest with my people is this Dieoff? Is this detoxing? Or am I sick? Right? So what happens when you have an illness, right? You get a cold, you get a runny nose, you're stuffy, you might get a fever, you're tired, you might get some leg cramps especially if you have a fever, you get leg cramps or achy joints, right? That's pretty common. Okay, what happens when you detox? You might get a runny nose or loose stools, you might have a fever if you're detoxing more intensely. You might be sore, your joints might be sore, you might get leg cramps. Okay, hold on. So my explanation for that and for this next one, which we'll say, so Dieoff, what happens when you have Dieoff? Well, you might get a runny nose, you might have loose stools, you might have achy joints, or skin rashes, right? That can be in all three. I forgot to say that earlier. You might have a headache for all three, right? So there are individual symptoms that kind of happen in a category, but also they're kind of all in the same bucket, right? And your body tends to respond. You know, we say when we're detoxing hard, I feel like I was hit by a truck, which is what we say when we have the flu. So all three of those things, as I worked on them, my thought was, okay, so if the body is doing inflammation, the immune system only has two arms. It has memory immunity and inflammatory immunity. So that means all of these things are inflammatory immune system response. So because the immune system is doing something, it looks the same. I still believe that's true, by the way, but I have a further, broader picture of it. So what happens? How do we know? How do we know if it's detox, die-off, or illness? Well, sometimes you can guess by what preceded it. Sometimes you can guess by how long it takes to go away, or if you stop some things, right? It might be die-off. Why don't you back up on your ferments a little bit for a few days, see if that helps, right? But it's the same. Not exactly the same. Like some illnesses feel different than other illnesses, right? Some detox reactions feel different than others, especially depending on how strong. But in essence, it's the same bucket. So you can't really tell, but it doesn't really matter because what do? We support the body, what it's doing, because we trust the body that it knows what it's doing and that it's doing a good thing. So if that's all true, it doesn't really matter if you're detoxing, unless you're doing die-off and you need to slow down on something, or detox and you need to slow down on something. Excuse me. Got a drip of my faucet on this side of my nose today. Okay, so if that is happening, that kind of put a little, it ripened the field for these new concepts. Okay, here are the new concepts without further ado. In this year of immune system investigation, which I loved what happened in the last 365 days, approximately, maybe a little less, right? The things that have been published, the discussions that have happened, the things that have not been published, the just paradigm shifts, the delineation, people needing to take a stance, natural practitioners dividing into germ theorists and what's called terrain theorists. Oh, I forgot that. Sorry, let's go back. So terrain theory, I've talked about it so many times, but you may not have heard of this. So terrain theory is Béchamp, the other guy here. Developed a terrain theory. He did it in the year, oh dear, sorry, I lost my page. He did it in the year 1854, so he's a little earlier than Pasteur. And he did some experiments about, he worked a lot to try to figure out what was causing diseases. He actually worked a lot with, some of his famous ones were with grape leaves that were getting a fungus. But in essence, eventually, his conclusion was it is not the germ that makes the disease. It is the terrain that the germ is in. If you have, and this is where our natural health paradigm can come in, where like if you have, sorry, let me say that differently. I have been a terrain theorist for many years now. I was a germ theorist by default because we all were only trained in germ theory. But pretty much as soon as I found GAPS, because Dr. Tasha, I would guess, is a terrain theorist. I'm not putting her in a box, but from what I know of her work, she would fall in this camp of terrain theory. Terrain theory says it's not the germ that makes the disease, it's the environment that created an environment ripe for the germ to do things. That was what I was taught about terrain theory. The more I've looked into terrain theory, actually, the more I found that Béchamp, I think, would agree with some of these more like, quote, out there ideas, including ones I'm going to present just in a second. Okay, so terrain theory. It's not that a germ comes around. And I actually discovered this in my nursing career. I can't remember where I was. I was either in nursing school or just barely a new nurse. So this is before 2010, a long time ago. And I remember learning that we vaccinated people against Haemophilus influenza B, Hib, because we vaccinated babies because it was the most common bacteria to cause meningitis. So it wasn't really about the ear infections, it was more about the meningitis risk. But then I realized that we actually, when you swab people, a high percentage, can't remember, but a high percentage of people have a normal flora growth of Hib in their ear or on their skin, and they never develop meningitis. And I went, huh, how could that be, right? Because I was a germ theorist at that point. So it didn't make sense to me that you could have the germ and not get the disease. So there was actually a question even before I walked into the natural health world. It didn't make sense. You have staph on your skin all the time, but sometimes it causes a staph cellulitis infection. Why? Why does that happen? Sometimes, but not other times. So everyone believes in terrain theory. You just didn't know that you did. You didn't know what it was, because we all see that. If you've done any work into science. Moms know this because, right, moms cuddle their baby 24 hours a day when they are sick, and the mom does not always get sick, right? There has to be a broader scope. Terrain theory has to be what's true. And now that we know that there's a microbiome, sterility does not equal life. It actually equals death, even for us or even for bigger beings. And so germ theory can't be true for so many reasons. Okay, so that's terrain theory. Sorry for that sidebar. So terrain theory and GAPS really set me up for this kind of idea. Okay, then I recently had this kind of very clarifying thought. I've been muddling around in some different thoughts since March of last year because there were a lot of conversations happening in my world, and that was so exciting to me because I love the immune system, and I love the microbiome, and I love food. It's like all of my favorite things have come together, and I could not be happier. So we read this book because Tom Cowan suggested it, The Invisible Rainbow. We, meaning my book club, did. I mean, this is how far I got, but we discussed it, and I also know quite a bit about what's in it. We read Epidemic of Absence. This is about what happens when you don't have childhood disease. That's another point we'll get to in a second. And then I picked up The Contagion Myth by Tom Cowan, talking about why viruses don't do what we think they do, basically. We'll just say it that way. And Tom Cowan, I heard him talk actually March or April, and that really got me on a kick of studying into things. There are two things that we're studying into. One, sorry, I'm trying to think how to form this next section. So people ask me all the time, like, what do you think about, COVID or COVID deaths or all this kind of thing? And the same with the V word, right? What do I think? Number one, I don't support unnatural things. And I think we should support our body in the way that I tell you to support your body in any way, in any illness. And so my recommendations did not change. They tweaked a little bit because I learned what the body needed for this particular process, but I did not change any of my philosophy, even as I was kind of exploring things in terms of like my health philosophy. You eat the right food, you support your body, you trust your body. If you're in a bad spot because you haven't been taking care of your body and you have really bad symptoms, like that's when modern medicine comes in. Please go do the modern medicine thing. But if your body's winning, let's help it win and do what it's doing. It's going to be better on the other side, right? So all of that. Number two, I obviously do not advocate for putting foreign substances in your body because I trust God gave the body the ability to do things. He didn't accidentally mess up in the year 2020. You can't get me to believe that. So there we go. Okay, so people ask me that all the time, and I'm on such a different wavelength. It's really hard for me to answer. I know what they're asking, right? But that's not where my brain is. My brain is what I'm about to say to you. So let me kind of present that. I know it's kind of a mess of a talk today, but this is a chat. Here are the new ideas. What if, just suppose, it came off of this question, which at some point I had. Who decided which bacteria and viruses were bad and which bacteria and viruses were good? Now you may go, well, some cause symptoms and some don't, but hear me out. Let's take a bacteria that we know is good. what about the probiotic Flora in milk kefir or milk kefir? That is a very good bacteria. We all know that. It's sold as the health food stores. We know we should have the profile of bacteria involved in milk kefir. If I eat even a teaspoon of milk kefir, I have a headache, a sore throat, and a bloody nose. To me, I would say that's bad, right? So who decided that was good? Okay, next example. One we know, of course, is bad. Measles. We know measles causes disease, right? Measles is a virus. There are studies that show that if you get measles, wild measles, real measles, sometime in your life, you have a less than 1% chance of getting brain cancer, ever. But measles is bad. We know it's bad, right? So this is where I'm coming from. I love for, again, I want you guys to push holes in what I'm doing. You can do it in the comments now if you have one, or things to add on, like, what about this? You don't have to be like, you're wrong and stupid and here, you know, it can be like a, hey, well, what about this? Like, this is what I'm thinking about, right? I would love, if there are holes to be poked in this theory, I want to poke them because I'm talking about it. And I would like to know where I'm saying things that are wrong, right? So, who decided what's good and bad? Okay, so let's look at this a different way. What if all bacteria, virus, microbiome, we'll just say microbia, right? What if all microbia has a specific role? What if one of those major roles is to help our body to function as large and cleanly as possible? Like largely meaning efficiently. What if our role is to function as efficiently as possible? Efficiency in our cells requires a few things. We need good oxygenation, we need clean cells that don't have toxins, and we need nutrition available to the cells to do any kind of metabolic process we need, right? So good food, clean water, and detoxification. Who maintains that? How does that work? Well, we need microbes to absorb food in our gut. We can do some of it, but we're pretty bad at it. And not just us, like cows are bad at it too. We need microbes to help us absorb food and break down food. And that's what fermentation is, right? You can ferment out of the body before you eat it to help the process as well, because we have very short digestive tracts. Number two, sorry, I'm skipping the detoxing one. What's the other one I said? Oh, clean. We need clean functional cells, and we need oxygenated cells. Okay, so oxygenated cells come probably from the water we drink, the air we breathe, but also that needs to get mixed into the blood, and that happens in the heart. And the heart is a vortex. It creates a vortex when the heart contracts, and the heart muscle contracts. So the heart muscle contracts, there's a vortex created, which helps increase the oxygenation of the blood, and then that oxygenation goes to the rest of the body. So if we don't have good nutrition, we can't oxygenate our blood well. I think, if I'm understanding Tom Cowan's work on this book, where is it? I have so many books next to me, everyone. Human Heart, Cosmic Heart, beautiful book. Read this book, so cool. Okay, so Human Heart, Cosmic Heart takes the principles of the 4 Spades of Water, which is also an excellent book, and the work of Leonardo da Vinci, where he drew and constructed a heart, and other people have constructed a heart. The heart is not actually a pump. It is a hydraulic dam that main purpose is actually to vortex the blood in our body to oxygenate it and to do some other things, as opposed to pumping it. That's a whole nother discussion, but that's, I've seen the proof on that. It makes sense to me. Okay, number 2, good food will help us oxygenate our blood. There is water you can drink that is more oxygenated, like spring water, so we can help ourselves out with that as well. And number 3, detoxification. The cells are helped in their detoxification by being clean by the mitochondria, and ultimately less toxins will come in if the flora in our gut stops them. So there's a lot of things that depend or are helped by flora. Flora is not everything, but flora is a large part. Okay, what else do we know? We know that many illnesses, especially in childhood, cause rashes. Chickenpox, measles, hand, foot, and mouth, molluscum contagiosum, right? Like all of the childhood diseases mostly cause rashes and fevers and other things, but rashes, right? That's what we get stressed about. Rashes are what? Rashes are toxins coming out of the skin. If your liver is like 100% functioning and you don't have another toxic load, you may have an illness without a rash because your liver is like able to process and handle it. But most times we get an illness, especially childhood illness, like think back 70 years. It's not muddle and right today's world, but think back 70 years. Chickenpox, measles, rubella, like all these things were an illness, and there's a rash accompanying, a very specific rash that started in a certain place and followed a specific pattern, and often was actually involved and included in childhood milestones, developmental milestones, because it happened. First you walk, and then you get this rash disease, and then you crawl. That's not how it works. Then you do this thing, and then you get this rash and disease. So there is a lot of proof, evidence that, there's a lot of coincidence to consider the idea that what if childhood illnesses are helping the body do something? Now, again, most of us have this idea that if you get sick more often, your immune system gets to practice and gets stronger. So this is just a little twist on that theory to say, what if that illness, quotation marks, that you got was not that you got sick and your immune system fought it off? What if you got exposure to a bacteria or a virus and your immune system welcomed it in to join the microbiome and to help you out with a new task that specific microbia specifically does? Going back to the measles point, measles virus somehow seems to cleanse the brain of the toxin that creates brain cancer. They are doing experiments where they inject measles virus into a tumor, and the tumor dies and gets disbanded. It's not the right word, but what if we're supposed to get childhood illnesses not to practice our immune system being stronger, but actually to welcome those things into our microbiome so that we can now handle more toxins and more hits at us? We are better able to cope in our world. Okay, so let's take this next case in point. No, sorry, let's take it to the next step. So the next step is, well, if it's a good microbiome, why do we get sick? Let's not talk about crazy sick. Let's just talk about like, you don't feel good. What is the symptoms coming from? If it's not fighting you, why is it not? Now, if you've been around me for a while, you probably have heard me say, the symptoms of an illness do not come from that virus or bacteria. I used to say that virus would happily come over and take over your whole body without you fighting back. That's completely wrong anymore. I don't believe that's what happens. But, right, that idea, that's what we've had. Like the symptoms of the body fighting, quote, fighting against that bacteria invading in you is actually what is causing your symptoms. Paradigm shift. What if what's causing your symptoms is that bacteria that's new was welcomed in and you're experiencing a detox reaction? Because that bacteria you welcomed in is really good at detoxing plastic number 7, making stuff up. And so all the plastic number 7, all of a sudden that microbiome expands. It goes, oh, I'm glad you brought me here. I have a lot of work to do. You have a lot of plastic number 7 in your body. And it pushes it all out through the skin or the lungs. And so then you get a cough. Maybe it's in your brain. Maybe it's in your sinuses. And you get a sinus infection. What if every single flora is trying to help us clean up? Funny you should ask me that. Because, let me pull this up. So, I'm going to try to do this while I'm talking, and hopefully it's still is going to help me work. Okay, so Florence Nightingale, that Notes on Nursing book I told you about, let me just pull that up. I did not buy a physical copy, and you don't have to either. There is a free PDF of Notes on Nursing that you can download from the internet. Notes on, sorry, it's really hard to do this. I'm talking. Okay, here we go. Florence Nightingale, Notes on Nursing, what it is, what it is not. And trying to find one that's not making me download it difficultly. Just let me have it, guys. Hey. Okay, in it, I can probably just quote it for you. In it, within the first page, like right after the introduction, she is talking about, sorry, I'm not. Okay, she's talking about disease, and she says, let us first take under assumption that every disease in the body is actually a restorative process, a restoration of a previous poisoning that happened days, months, or years previously. So Florence Nightingale herself would say, and I just loved her even more for this, that the body is restoring to health. It is cleansing from a poisoning. We had a discussion, we just read that one for book club, and we had a discussion, well, what kind of poisons were there in 1898? Because they are not the poisons that we have today, but there were poisons. There was a mismanagement of sewage, and there is like an overwhelm of the body. There are chemical things that are going to happen in sewage, right? There's going to be things that are produced when you have unabated sewage and bacteria that probably are trying to clean up, but maybe don't get in the middle of it while they're doing it, right? There was smoke from fires, coal, right? Lots of residue. There were herbs that you could accidentally eat. There were metals. Their medicines were a lot of heavy metals. They used lead and mercury, arsenic, right? There are poisons. We invented unnatural substances, but there definitely are like harmful things before we invented them in the 40s. So there were poisons. Also, there's a poisoning, meaning like a damage of the cells. If you have cells that are not getting fed, just like today, you can get damaging dysfunctional cells. When cells die, they release toxins, if you will. They release products of cell death, which can be very irritating to the other cells around them. So there's lots of things that could still happen, to make that true. Okay, so Florence Nightingale says, let's take under assumption that every disease is actually a restorative process of the body from a previous poisoning. That kind of sounds like what we were just talking about, right? So I was super excited because Tom Cowan said some stuff, and he said it with some other stuff, and it was pretty out there, and at least to the discussion of what people are at. I now think it's much less out there. But then I read Florence Nightingale, who literally changed hospitals and modern medicine, cleanliness, sanitation practices, still today. And she strongly and staunchly believes terrain theory is correct and germ theory is wrong. Okay, so exciting. So the postulation I'm coming to is, what if? Okay, so let's go with that. What if all bacteria and viruses and parasites? So what happens when you get a parasite infection? Quotation marks. If you get a parasite infection, you usually get diarrhea. But if you went to a mountain village in Argentina and drank the water from that stream, it's not full of toxins. It just has flora in it that you're not used to, right? Or you eat food off the street that lots of other people eat, but you get traveler's diarrhea, right? What happens? You get diarrhea. What if you got diarrhea because your flora was missing that flora? Your microbiome was missing that flora. It came in and it went, holy goodness, there is a lot of whatever its favorite toxin is here. I better get to work. Because when I'm helping people with Dieoff or Detox, do you know what they often have? Diarrhea. And you know what I tell them? It's okay, it's your body dumping things. So all of these thoughts are like, I was putting sickness in its own category while also not, but in my mind was finding that I was putting sickness in a different category. But it's the same. It fits in the same box. So it's a paradigm shift in terms of illness, but it's not a paradigm shift in terms of microbiome, nutrition, feeding, supporting the body. Like, it's literally the same. It actually fits better in the box. There were things about illness that were less present. They didn't fit as well. They didn't fit in the paradigm. And I was like, well, I guess I don't know everything yet, which is true. Still don't. But like, that was just I didn't have a good reason for why they didn't fit, but I just was like, well, I haven't really studied that. So I guess I don't get it yet. Right. So you get exposed to some river water and you all of a sudden get an influx of flora. Now there is a balance active flora. I would argue that the flora is trying to do a good job for you, but it can potentially kill you. So I'm not saying you should never get treated and you should go drink the spring water and don't get treated if you're having symptoms and diarrhea that's coming out. Like, please do. But know what's happening. That it's not that evil flora came in and it's hurting you or attacking you. What if it is that flora came in and tried to detox you of something in a Dieoff way or detox way, one or the other, rebalance you, and it just was too intense to sustain your life, so you had to stop the process. But it's not the flora's fault that you had so much built up. So if you had been exposed when you were very little, you probably would have been fine. Hence, all the babies who grew up in those areas. Now, I get it. Lots of babies do die of diarrhea is one of the main things to die of. I would love to look into that data, and that's kind of one of the things I'm going to keep my eye out for now. Looking into the data of, okay, did you as a scientific exploration focus on more than just they get a disease, we identified the germ, we gave the vaccine for the germ, and now we don't get the disease as much, which, by the way, doesn't even work. Usually death rates are higher in populations that are fully vaccinated than unvaccinated, even in third world countries, even related to that. There are other modern medicine practices like hydration with IVs that are much more effective at preventing death than a vaccination. Okay. I knew this was going to be a mess. God bless you people who are staying with me. Okay. Detoxing. If we have a lot of toxins in our body, don't we want them to get out? What do toxins lead to? Mostly cancer, Parkinson's, MS, fibromyalgia. Like, the really bad stuff is what toxins lead to. I do not want unabated toxins in my body. I want to have a robust microbiome that detoxes everything out of my body that is not helpful. Then we look at, okay, so that's that. Number 2, I have written down, I'm trying to stay on a little bit of things. It's not working. Number 2, what about flora that overgrows, right? Because this is a really important point. Flora that overgrows is like a field of weeds, right? Okay. A few things with weeds that we know, so just throwing them all out there. Number 1, we know that a weed is something that is where we don't want it to be, not necessarily like a tomato in the middle of your cornfield could be a weed. You could consider that a weed, right? So a weed is just something that's not where you want it to be. But we also have a conventional definition of weed, so let's go with that. A weed, like a thistle. Well, what does a thistle do? Putting aside any kind of ideas of the herbs that tend to treat the diseases that are present, actually, oh my goodness. Mind blown right there, guys. Oh my goodness. Okay, let me try to walk you through my thought. Thistles appear in ground that needs it, and in physical locations that need it, meaning there are people with the disease that herb treats. It's all about ecosystem. All of it is about ecosystem. There's a large ecosystem of our world and your like physical world and state and city and all of that. in your house, and then there's the internal ecosystem of your body. Weeds do a few really important things. They can overproduce, right? We can have a huge thistle field, and oh my goodness, isn't that annoying? What are those thistles doing? They are pulling nutrition from the base layers underneath the topsoil up into the topsoil because we trashed the topsoil. Sometimes it's not us, sometimes it was a rainstorm or a flood, right? But there are weeds or plants that are known. The Big Thompson flood up here by me, I visited a site and they had like a little plaque and they're like, we have brought, they seeded it with things that are known to be brought when the ground is disturbed to help restore the flora. So ecosystem studiers, ecologists, is that what they're called? They will study, they know this. They know there are certain plants and there's stages to restoration. So the water, water washes everything out, or we decimate a field with chemicals. What grows first? Weeds. Weeds grow in that ground. And we think, oh, that's a sign of poor health, which it is. But also, what if those weeds are helping? Because they are. What if that ground is getting overgrown by an abundance of thistles, because the thistles are the only thing that can survive, and they're going to eventually fix it. And 10 or 15 or 20 years down the line, we now have soil that's ready to plant a crop in again. What if the weeds or bad flora or these more things that produce toxic symptoms, what if they are actually good? What if they are helping us because we got that bad in the first place, that deficient of nutrients, that damaged and chemically killed of soil, right? Our gut flora especially or our gut lining is a soil. All of our microbiome breathes and grows there and then is put out in the rest of our body, including to our skin and our eyes and our everywhere. If we don't have good soil, what's going to grow there? Weeds. What do weeds cause? Really annoying fluff, thorns and thistles. But what is the point? It's trying to fix things. Okay, so we take that to the human body. What is one of the most abundant weeds in the human body? Candida yeast. Huge, right? It will bloom out, it will take over. Candida yeast eats heavy metals for you. It converts mercury into a less toxic form, or even chelates it out of the body so it does not go to your brain and give you Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, or MS. And it makes you crave lots of carbohydrate foods, and a lot of people gain weight and get bloated and get brain fog and all of that kind of things, but it's trying to keep you from getting Parkinson's, right? So the weed is trying, and there's a process of it. Now, in all of this, don't hear me that I don't think we should insert a change in the system, because I think we should. But when we don't know what the process is that's happening, how can we help it along, right? So if we think that the candida is an evil monster that needs to be killed, then we will spend a lot of energy killing it, probably kill other flora around it, and then have a whole bunch of mercury in your brain because you killed all the candida. Or we could say, oh, candida, thanks for telling me there's a ton of mercury or heavy metal or whatever it is that it's there for. Let's get that out. Let's feed our liver with B vitamins so we can detox that. Let's make sure we're getting enough minerals to be able to chelate those out. Let's give good flora. Let's give good yeast. Let's drink milk kefir, because we need to get that heavy metal out. And then do you know what will happen? And we know that this is what happens because I've seen it with GAPS. All the GAPS practitioners have seen it with GAPS and other things. When you get the body clean of toxins, do you know what happens to the flora? It balances out and it's very happy and it works with you. Because we're no longer in a crisis mode of cleaning up the body or trying to restore nutrition. What we actually are in is a state of health, so you can now plant a crop in your field and it will grow beautifully and easily. So what I would postulate with all of that is, if you are having issues with a flora overgrowth, it's the fault of your ecology. It's the fault of your ecosystem. Your ecosystem is out of balance somehow, and the flora is just trying to fix it. If we help out with the fixing, the flora can go into balance again, and you will stop experiencing those negative symptoms. So one of the things that I'm practically experimenting with people, it sounds bad, but it's totally not in a bad way. If people have yeast overgrowth, we know that milk kefir, is good to combat yeast, candida. What if it's actually just helping do the job, but it's just a nicer plant? The candida does have a lot of side effects, but it's just trying to do its best. What if the fact that we have heavy metals or candida overgrowth is just because we have a deficiency of flora in general? And if we increase those flora, there's actually a lot to do the job, not just the candida that's giving you the symptoms. So I think that we can and should insert ourselves in many ways. Number one, we can eat nutrient-dense foods that help heal the soil of our gut. And that's what GAPS is, right? The foods and pillars of GAPS. Fermented vegetables, because they're very high in nutrition, availability, and probiotics, but let's focus on nutrition for a second. Animal fat, very high in nutrition. Meat stock, very high in easily accessible nutrition. Egg yolks, those are the main kind of, and organ meats. Those are really the main powerhouses of, let's just give a lot of easy to access food and building blocks for the cells. Number two, let's replant the garden or help with the cleanup. Let's replant the garden. So if the flora is working really, really hard to chelate out all of your toxins, it's dying in that process. A lot of bacteria will cleave to the toxin to make it go out of the stool. And so it's giving its life to get the toxin out. If you're not replenishing your flora, you will eventually run out of flora if you have more toxins, right? If you have more toxins than your ability to reproduce the flora, you will run out of flora. So eating probiotic foods and fermented foods and probiotic capsules and et cetera, especially kind of getting into the study of specific ones. Dr. Becky Plotner wrote a book about specific ferments that we just heard about on the GAPS online conference a couple weekends ago, or a weekend and a half ago. I'm planning to get that book. I'm super excited. She talks about, here's the symptoms you have, here's the probiotic food that you need to make sure that you're eating. So I'm very excited about that. You can go look up the Plotner Garden, I think, but if you look up Dr. Becky Plotner GAPS diet, I'm sure you'll find it. She's back east somewhere. Okay, super excited about that. So we plant things, and we plant specific things. Usually, if you don't know or don't have a book, whatever probiotic food or fermented food that you eat that gives you a Dieoff symptom, milk kefir for me, is one that you really need. You're missing it, right? Because based on our old theory, or the discussion we just had, not the old theory, the discussion we just had, I'm having symptoms because that milk kefir is coming in and it's like, oh, I've got a lot of work to do. And that work is so intense that it's uncomfortable. Okay. We build with nutrition, we help our flora, and number three, we help our body to detox. Doesn't this sound exactly like GAPS? This is why GAPS works so well, because it's completely in line with this. So we detox. We do detox baths. We feed the liver. We feed the kidneys. We do bikavas. We eat more probiotics so that they can cleave to toxins and make them come out and chelate things. And so we've got just all of this stuff happening, right? 1, 2, 3. 3 main areas of GAPS, how GAPS works, why GAPS works, or why any healing diet works. You have enough of those principles to help rebalance your ecosystem, and now all of a sudden you have a great ecosystem. How do we maintain a good ecosystem? Abundance of flora, I would argue, is the most important thing to maintain your ecosystem. Now, things go into that. You need to not poison your flora. If you have a thriving pond life, like external pond, and you dump chemicals in it, do you know what will happen? It will all die. That flora probably died valiantly, but it was an overwhelmed thing. So doing a lot of chemicals, a lot of processed foods, red dye number 19, whatever the things are, right? Eating food covered in pesticides. Pesticides kill flora. That's their point. They kill tiny little creatures, including the microbiome in the soil, which is why our food is crap now. Okay, it's okay. We can still help, and these things still recover, because there are people, and I'm trying to remember the guy, I think it's in this 4th phase of water. But basically, if you dump enough microbiome into a pond, it will eventually clean it up and become non-toxic again. So Yes, you're going to have to give up a lot of soldiers to the fight, but you can win that fight no matter how toxic the environment is. Now, can you win the fight against our toxic world and eat cupcakes and donuts on a regular basis? No, you just can't. It's not a reality. You just can't do that. But can we have a very healthy life even in the midst of this? Yes. Is it really hard? Yes. Would it have been easier 100 years ago? Yes. But we're here. And we can have a healthy life, and our kids can have a healthy childhood. But it's going to be really hard because everything is fighting against it because our world is full of toxins. 80,000 toxins, man-made toxins, is the number that was talked about at the GAPS online conference. 80,000 man-made toxins are in our environment. And we are probably exposed to almost all of them, at least in trace amounts. So we really need to be eating probiotics. But if we have probiotics and we're maintaining those and they're strong colonies and they have good food, because they have to have good food, you also can't just feed them crap. Good food, lots of help, support. We're as careful as we can be without being, some people have to be more careful than others, right? But we're as careful as we have to or need to be. We can maintain a really healthy flora. What does a really healthy flora do for us? Digest our food, so we are full of nutrition all the time, as long as we're eating decent foods. Number 2, it binds toxins and then just reproduces. So as long as we don't overwhelm it with toxins, it keeps our bodies clean and healthy. That will prevent autoimmune disease, cancer, pain. I know we're not in heaven, right? So I'm not promising a perfect world, and none of us can do this as perfectly as we want to, but like this is the concepts. Okay, so we have all of those things. And then we have, so maintaining a flora, and I would argue getting your flora as diverse as possible is the most important thing that you can do for your health, and the thing I think we should focus on. So in terms of, let's go back to the V question, right? And I said that people are asking me about that and asking me about childhood immunizations and all of that. What is that? What is my answer for that? Now you probably can understand a little bit why that's a really hard question, because I don't even consider diseases a negative. I consider not getting diseases and flora a negative. I think that everything we can expose ourselves to within reason and with wisdom, knowing if we've not been exposed, you can't just go expose yourself to 27 things at once, right? So do we start exposing ourselves to things at the rate that we do for a probiotic that causes us Dieoff? Because essentially, isn't it a probiotic? If you go to the river and drink a whole bunch of river water and get sick and die, you can't sue me. I'm not telling you to do that, right? But just be expressing. Now, am I considering potentially trying some drops of river water this summer? Maybe, if my flora is strong enough. But I'm saying that I don't think we should be afraid of that. I think we should be wise about it. I think we should be realistic where our flora is and how much. But I think it's the way that's going to help us be clean. Okay, so then we get to this one, COVID. What about COVID? The other toxin that's poisoning our body is electricity. This Invisible Rainbow book talks a lot about the electrification of the earth, and that every time that a major electrification change came to the world, there was a world global pandemic. Now, I know that people are seeing, did COVID get manufactured in a lab? You know, did it start in this, whatever, the market, wet market? Did it start, like, what is it? And you know what? I don't know, because I do think there are substances that kind of go around. Oh, we should probably talk about that. I think there are substances. There are bacteria we've definitely identified. Viruses are a bit trickier. The thing that I would say about virus is we can observe a viral kind of consistent process. There's a lot of debate about whether viruses exist, whether what you measure as viruses are exomes. I kind of wonder, is there something that, like, there is an exome, but there's something else that's a virus, but you don't actually know what that is? There also is a lot of evidence that viral transmission may actually be a frequency transmission, kind of almost like a hormonal communication between you and me. Just like you can feel, people who are empathetic, right, empaths, they can feel people's pain. They literally get in touch with their vibrational frequencies and feel what they're feeling. Those types of things, like, is there a communication? Trees do it. Trees communicate with each other when there's a disease, and they start secreting different substances to protect from that disease, because one tree got sick and then all the other trees hear about it through a vibrational communication, and then they put out different substances that protect them from getting that disease. Again, there is clearly a disease thing, right? There are disease in a way of like things can get off. And this is where I'm like, okay, I haven't quite gone through all this, because how do I don't know tree diseases well enough. Was that disease actually helpful? Does the we have a lot of pine beetle kill here in Colorado. So does that pine beetle kill, does it serve a purpose for the ecosystem in a larger sense? I've heard different theories about forest fires are really important because they actually kill the larvae of the pine beetles. However, I've also heard about how different atmospheric environments create the trees to be dry, so they're actually ill first. And then the beetles come to an ill tree to kill it, because that's what bugs do. They clean up dead things and get them out of the way, so there's enough resources for healthy things. Nature is not always kind. There's definitely like a kill for the greater good thing. We don't do that as people because we are made in the image of God, but the rest of nature, like, there is a kill for the greater good thing. So maybe that's what's happening. Maybe that pine beetle is good. It's good for the forest. It obviously killed that tree, but what if it's good for the forest? What if that's what the goal is and it's actually a good goal? So there's just so much. Okay, so going back to, I think there are substances that maybe can get transferred, but again, if I transfer my cold bacteria to you and you've never experienced it before and your body accepts it in, I don't think it's going, oh my goodness, we're under attack. I think it's going, hey, we need this, and this will help us clean up, and this will be really helpful. And then we can get rid of these toxins that are piled up over here, because this was the bacteria we were missing. So just an interesting paradigm. I think that some people are so deficient in flora that they might get exposed to a whole bunch at once. Or when they get exposed to it, the detox reaction is so strong it literally could actually kill them. In those cases, I highly recommend modern medicine to stop that. That is why I think with COVID, so let's look at COVID. What happens with COVID? A few observations that have been very consistent in my practice and the lots of people I've taken care of with this, and in other people's practice that I've talked to. If you boil it down to, or I ask them these questions, the thing that we notice is that I have noticed a trend with people who are very metal toxic or very nutritionally nutritioned. They have a lot of nutrition because they've been working on their health. Those are the people that get the sickest. We also have seen in the world, and those just aren't my people, we've seen in the world that people with multiple comorbidities. Well, I look at multiple comorbidities as they're deficient in nutrients and they have a ton of toxins and they're just not handling their environment very well. So I just see them as like lots of toxins, right? So comorbidities, lots of toxins. That's how I view it. So my world are people who are trying to do their health, but they know they have heavy metal toxicity. Those are people who got hit the very hardest with COVID in general. That included me, and I know I had a lot of metals. I had a lot of metal in my mouth for a lot of years, a lot of metal symptoms, a lot of candida, which is a toxin or a bacteria that helps with the toxin of metals, right? So a lot of evidence of metals in my body. And I got as sick as most people I knew. There were a few people that got way sicker than me, and I still it was a really bad cold, and it wasn't pleasant, but I never was scared for my life or anything like that. If you have an allergy, sorry, let me back up. So COVID comes in as a new virus, whatever that means, and it stimulates your body, or it helps your body, or puts its key in the lock, and your body starts detoxing something. Damage from something. There's people who say that the damage is coming from 5G, maybe. There's people who say the damage is coming from something else, something they put in flu vaccines. Well, that can't be because I didn't ever get one. So damage, right? Again, Florence Nightingale. Let's take on the premise that all diseases are a restorative process from a previous poisoning. Now, the symptoms of a certain substance or poison detoxing will look similar because it's going to go out through the same channels and it's going to kind of have the same pattern. So that is why I think we have like disease symptoms, quotation marks, because those disease symptoms are things that are similar because the toxin from that particular virus or bacteria, it's a particular toxin and it goes out a particular way, and when it hits the cells of the skin, it looks like a particular rash, or it goes out through the nose and so you get a stuffy nose, or it goes out through the lungs and so you get lung issues. Because the lungs are a huge detox organ in our body. So what if that's what's happening? So then, for whatever reason, we had a huge global need to detox something. Well, the only thing that's really globally connected would be, well, there's probably lots of things. There's probably toxins in food, water probably spread all over. But we know electricity, specifically 5G, is a global thing. And some of the hardest hit areas are areas that were blanketed with 5G first. Wuhan, China was the first city to be fully blanketed in 5G network. Where did COVID start? Right? So what if, I think it's a combination. I don't know if this virus is a new one that morphed. Like, does God make it that we can, like, that new viruses can appear to kind of balance out things? I don't know, maybe. Or was it in the genetic, like, we know we've had a COVID coronavirus strain for a long time, like, right? It morphs all the time. So maybe in the genetic outlook of the coronavirus, generic, there is something that could morph to specifically help this, because God in his wisdom gave us the ability to handle and be able to survive no matter what happens. I mean, within reason. Like, you can take hemlock and die. I'm not saying you are, for sure immortal or anything like that, but right. But within reason. What's really interesting, if you look at The Invisible Rainbow, this book talks about the electrification of the earth and how with every major upgrade in electrification, we started having universal pandemic symptoms that spread faster potentially than like planes and trains and automobiles could go. So the 1918 pandemic that we all are well familiar with now, that was the first time that radar was really popular and was significantly connected around the world, even very remote areas, and it happened very quickly, which would indicate the spread, and it was very concentrated on military bases, which is where the Spanish flu outbreak began. Maybe it's contagious because your body had a COVID upgrade, like a COVID upgraded virus that helped your body out. One of the things viruses seem to do is help upgrade our own tissue to reprogram a little bit. That's, I think, probably in this pleomorphism thing, the ability of cell structures to kind of change a bit. I'm not really sure. I haven't studied into that, like, to be able to talk wisely about it yet. But there is something, and that's actually what the RNA vaccine is based on, is it's mimicking the virus's ability to change our own DNA. And if you remember back at school, when we learned about viruses from like Magic School Bus, they talked about the bacteria, how they replicated outside of the cell. We can see bacterial replication. We've never seen viral replication. We assume it replicates inside of the cell, right? It hijacks our cell. It's what we were taught. It hijacks our cell, makes it do its bidding, makes thousands of itself, and then explodes the cell, and those spread out all over the place. There's lots of nuances to that, but what if that virus went in? Maybe it did replicate, and it can be spread to another person. I don't think that I would say that COVID or any virus is not contagious, because there is some communication sharing. But if you have that flora already, and I communicate with you, your body's like, I'm good, I already got it, right? That would go on with why people are, quote, immune. And then if you like went to someone who needed it, their body's like, oh my goodness, this is exactly what I'm looking for. I need help upgrading the system because I'm really struggling here with this 5G kind of poisoning. I need some protection. I need to modify my cell structure a little bit to protect, because that's what viruses do. They seem to be able to modify or help our body modify or whatever, our cell structure. So what if that's what's happening? What if I come see you and your body's like, oh my goodness, I'm so glad you came because I need that. It modifies your cell structure. There's definitely like byproducts of cell death as that's happening, / maybe there's a lot of toxins or toxic damage from the radiation of the 5G, basically, already present that your body now can deal with and get rid of old cells and make new cells. And everyone's really excited except you because you got sick and you had to stay home from work 2 weeks because right now just absolutely is monstrous. But because it is okay for human beings to get sick. That is okay. And it's not, I would argue, the argument then would go to, it is not your fault if someone else doesn't have the flora or if their body is so full of toxins that when they get exposed to something, their body tries to clean up and they are uncomfortable and they have symptoms. It's actually probably good for them. Now, I'm not saying we're God and we get to decide what to do. And there are people who have not been living their life for a really long time in a cleanup ways, right? So there's moral dilemmas we can talk about, but in terms of like actual moral dilemma, I think it's helpful. That would be my postulation. I think it's helpful to get as much flora as possible, even ones we consider, quote, diseases. Because think back to the measles. You get measles, now you don't get brain cancer. I'd trade that any day. Great. Homeoprophylaxis, HP, is very interesting in here because remember I was just talking about vibrational frequencies? How does HP work? It uses vibrational frequencies to help your body, your immune system, understand about a disease. So now I have questions for my homeopathic friend. We are reading this book for book club and she's in it, and so then I'll ask them and I'll let you know the update. Because this is a first pass. I'm going to keep refining this, but I think it's really important and I'm excited to get this kind of refined out in a teachable place. Thank you all for being here it's fun. It's a think tank brain dump. I love being part of these, but not everyone can have the attention span, so good job being here. Okay, so my questions for my homeopath. Okay, what exactly is the vibrational frequency doing? We know, and I know some of her answer is she doesn't know because we've talked about it and they're trying to study it. And some things that are coming out are actually helping them understand how homeopathy works, even though they've been using it since like 1570 or something like that. They know it works. They know it works to mitigate disease, but they don't know how. What if it's exposing the body to the frequency just like the disease does? So then you clean up if you need to, or at least you like get it. And the earlier you get it, maybe you have less risk of kind of having significant symptoms when you are as if you were exposed to it if you were later and you have a lot of toxins built up. So my question to her is going to be, number one, can a HP dose help your body clean up? And I think maybe because you sometimes see a immune response reaction, which is maybe a fever, maybe a stuffy nose, maybe a whatever. So like, and some people have a very strong reaction. What if those people that have a very strong reaction needed the flora and they are missing it? So they had a whole bunch of stored toxin. This is really good for them. And they should definitely do HP, but maybe in small doses, which is just like giving a probiotic, but only drops at a time. Like it all fits in the same pattern. And I love it. I love that it all fits in the same pattern. Okay, so that's my number one question. What if this is happening? What if what we just talked about, vibrational frequencies, go? Give me your thoughts. Number two, we know, and I've heard evidence that she has presented, Amber, that she's presented about, we used to think that immunity is because, maybe you guys have had this thought. We used to think that immunity is because our body, in the memory side of the immune system, remember I said there are two arms, made a T cell that remembered that disease. So then when it comes around again, we very quickly identify it and kill it and take it away. what if that's not how it works? Or like that just blows my theory out of the water, right? Well, there's this. People who genetically cannot make T cells still show disease resistance to diseases they've been exposed to or done HP for. Meaning you do not have to have T cells against a disease to have immunity to that disease. What do we do when we're checking for immunity to a disease when you got a vaccine? We draw blood and do what's called a titer. And if you have immune cells against that disease, then you should be immune from that disease. But people who are immune to that disease according to their blood titer sometimes get that disease. How does that work? How does that work? So I think the answer maybe is we don't know what the immune system is doing. And the more I've read into that, the more I realize we have no idea how the immune system works, especially in that memory side. What we know about memory of disease is not, it's not playing out. It plays out most of the time, but not all of the time. And to have a theory that is correct, it has to work all of the time. You have to have a theory that includes all possible outcomes and relates to that. So I think the theory of how immunity is shown or developed needs to be examined. Well, what if immunity is I've already accepted that flora into my microbiome? Not that the body's attacking it, but it's already come in, it detoxed what it needed to, all the adjustments are made, and now we're hunky-dory with a more robust flora, so we actually have better health. Isn't that what it looks like when we get sick and get better? Back to COVID. Okay, so what if we communicate with each other and then my body's like, hey, I did this cool detox upgrade thing. Like, do you want to do it too? And your body's like, oh yeah, let's do it. And maybe I get a little bit sick and you get a lot sick. Kids who are already born upgraded because they developed at a higher, like our 100-year-old grandparents, they had almost no electricity exposure. So they're the ones getting really sick from this transfer. Our kids who were born with 4G, already present, their cells probably like you as a mother communicate. We know that. We know that we give genetic communication to our children to be able to better survive in this world if we have the proper nutrition and ability to do that. And so kids aren't getting this disease because usually kids are more vulnerable, right? Why are they not? No one's asked that question. No one's answered that question. What if they're more vulnerable or less vulnerable to COVID because it's about an upgrade for the electronics and they actually just don't need to upgrade that much? So a lot of them, I have a lot of kids that got a little sick. It would be nothing more than a cold and they never would notice it more than a cold. Some of them lose their taste of smell and taste. Usually it's because a parent got tested for work or like had to or got more intense symptoms and lost their sense of taste. Usually the kids don't. So it's just much more mild. Why is it mild? Some kids are very, very sick. I take care of kids that are sicker than adults I took care of 10 years ago, like at 6 months or 12 months old, because our world is just toxic. But most kids are less. They have newer cells. They don't need to upgrade because they're born into an electronic advanced world already. And it wasn't that big of a jump to kind of go to the 5G for them. So now, is 5G good for us? No, it's definitely hurting our bodies. That's a whole nother thing. It messes with our calcium channels, so it hurts our heart. Our heart is also getting hurt when we detox. We use a lot of B vitamins. And then our heart gets hurt by the lack of B vitamins because it needs that fuel to be strong in its beating. This side. So our hearts are taking a lot of hits, and there's a lot of heart-related deaths happening, both from the COVID experiment. It is not a vaccine. It is an experiment. They are in study trials, and anyone who takes it right now is a study trial volunteer, whether they know it or not. But you can go on their website. I took screenshots. I copied screenshots someone else made. I haven't verified them yet independently, but they looked very legit, just taken from their website. It is published publicly that there is a COVID experiment that is a study trial period until August of 21. So currently, the FDA approved a study trial, basically, and you're in it if you take the COVID vaccine. So anyway, what was I saying? Got off track. Oh, B vitamin deficiency is really huge. B vitamins deficiency symptoms include spasms of the arms and legs, heart issues, Bell's palsy, brain fog, purple toes, heart, sometimes taste, skin rashes, just a lot of the really yucky stuff we're seeing. Why do certain people get sick? Sometimes we detox a lot of crap and we can't handle it well. And again, that's why I'm glad we have modern medicine. A lot has to do with the heart. That's a whole nother discussion about what I think about is happening. But ultimately, take a lot of B vitamins. If you got COVID, you need B and zinc. The other immune support stuff is great, but B and zinc are what your body is needing to detoxify. Because, yes, do I think there's a viral something, whatever a virus is? There seems to be. How is it spread? I don't know. Probably hormonally and a vibrational frequency transfer. Maybe it's a molecule that gets through your mask. It's really little. They've never identified it. They've not isolated it. I don't know what's in the vaccine because they've never isolated the virus itself. That's a whole nother discussion, right? But it just takes some B vitamins. Take a lot of from natural sources. Some liver. Eat liver. Has zinc and B. Eat a lot of liver. It'll be great. All right. I think our job is to feed and care for our flora and expose ourselves to as many strains as possible. That will help make up the difference between the toxic world and the lack of good food and all of that kind of thing. So that is my thought. Thank you for sitting there with me. There's a bit of delay, so type any questions that you have. I'm going to get off here in a few minutes. If we don't have any, I know there's not a ton of people that were able to join us live. Share this out for people who are nerds like us and want to know and have a conversation. I'm excited to have this live posted as long as everything goes well. Dear God, please help it go well. I will post this live as a replay, and then hopefully we can get a good discussion happening underneath it. Or you can email me if you have a lot to say about it and don't want to make it be public, I guess, but encourage public conversation if possible, because then it stimulates other people. So, questions. Thanks for coming. These are great books. I'm working on just saying things while I'm waiting to just check for questions. I'll probably stay on 2 more minutes till the end of the hour. Yep, these are great things. These are great things I'm working on. Great books. Just having a blast. I'm having a blast studying this because it's super fun. So I'm going to work on getting this kind of put together. This was a good discussion. It was a good, obvious thing for how disorganized my thoughts still are. Sometimes they're more organized than others, but I usually get tipped off at a specific question in an appointment and then kind of go from there, as opposed to trying to present all of the things that I know. And that just takes a while to get kind of hammered out. So thanks for being at the sounding board today. Okay, I don't see any questions. Brain is on overload. Well, good. It's fun. So thank you for putting that in, at least to confirm that the thing went through the whole way. Because again, this restream is new to me, but I'm excited to be able to screen share and be a little more. You can invite guests in here, so I can do guest discussions and things like that. So I'm very excited to see how it works, and hopefully it records still on YouTube. It should, and do it. Fascinating about the virus. Yeah, studying the virus. There's something called Koch's postulates, Koch postulates, which is basically you have to isolate it, grow it, put it in something else living, and create the same symptoms to say that something is a contagion. Does that make sense? No virus meets Koch's postulates. So somehow it works differently. You can't just spread it. Pasteur tried really hard. Oh, this is another fascinating thing. Pasteur tried really hard to prove that to try to isolate a virus or a bacteria and spread it, to prove that was the thing. But the only way he ever did it is if they took a whole blood sample and gave it to the other animal or thing, which means that the toxins, if you go with the toxin theory, the toxin that comes along with the virus, which is trying to help in this theory, gets into the bloodstream, and then the bunny or whatever has a reaction. But you can't prove it's not to the toxin, because if he isolated it, because we have isolated bacteria at least, but if he isolated it completely and put it into he could not create the symptoms. It was only when there was the whole blood. So there's something else. There's something else that's causing the contagion, not the virus or bacteria, potentially. So, well, you're so welcome. Thanks for being with us. Yay. Okay, I am going to go off and say goodnight and have a lovely time. So thankful to see you all, and we will see you later. Bye.